Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I'm back with another Word Study Wednesday for you guys. I did go ahead and do a Tip Tuesday yesterday, sharing a detailed look at how I use the Blue Letter Bible app or Strong's Concordance to do one of these word studies. If you're just jumping in with us, this is a new series that I started on Wednesdays last month, and so I will put the playlist down below. There is a video for each one of these cards that we've done so far, and so you can get caught up and see some of the different ways that we have created these amazing word cards. I'm having so much fun with these. So you can check out that playlist and check out the Tip Tuesday if you want to see how I get the information for these word studies. But I am working with these word focus cards from Open Journey. I will have everything linked down below for you guys. I am super excited to see so many of you joining in with me. If you do join in, make sure you use the hashtag Word Study Wednesdays so that we can see what you're learning and what you're creating, and we can all kind of join in together on Wednesdays. So today is the word forgive, and I did kind of use this as my example card in my Tip Tuesday yesterday, so you can see how I worked through the various verses and finding definitions and all that goodness. And so for the back of the card, I went ahead and used the first passage that Ingrid has for us, which is Matthew 6:12 through 15. Now, I had my app set to the King James Version and hadn't switched over to one of the other versions that I typically use. So this is in the King James Version. It says, "And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." So we're talking about forgiveness. This can be so tough. I don't know about you. I can be a grudge holder. That is definitely a fault of mine. And so forgiveness can be super hard for me, especially when I have been hurt by somebody personally, something like that. Over the years, I've had to go through so many different instances of having to work through forgiveness. And so as we looked at the original words, now there's two different words for the word forgive. Now, I went ahead and used the aphiemi word just because I thought the definition was so interesting to me. So the definition for aphiemi is to send away, to let go, to give up, to permit, to leave. So we are sending away our grudges. We are letting go of that, resentment that we might have or whatever it might be. When we forgive somebody, we need to completely give up, leave, send away, let go, those feelings that we have towards that person. And so I wanted to make sure that I just remind myself of that, this, sending it away, letting it go, giving up. I thought that was really interesting. And then David Guzik had this quote that I came across as I was studying. He says, "Forgiveness is required for those who have been forgiven. We are not given the luxury of holding on to our bitterness towards the people." So in the same way that the Father has forgiven us, we must forgive others. And, sometimes that takes some sacrifice. With God's forgiveness, it took the sacrifice of his Son for our sins, right? And so we may need to experience a little bit of sacrifice when it comes to forgiving somebody, sacrificing our feelings, our emotions, whatever we feel owed to us in that situation, we need to give that up and sacrifice that. And so today's card is a little bit more simple when it came to the study time, but I did look up some commentaries and things like that. And again, if you're curious how I do that, check out yesterday's video. I will have that link down below. So this is the card that's going to go on the back of this card. Now, sometimes I tie in elements on the front to the study that I did, and sometimes I just kind of do whatever. That's kind of the fun thing about these cards. It just kind of gives us a creative outlet as we are reflecting and kind of meditating on what we studied. And so today is going to be one of those instances where it's just an idea that I had that I wanted to do that didn't really translate well into a Bible journaling entry. And so it's something that I wanted to try and play with. And so these cards are perfect for that. So I have seen all of these really neat specimen cards as I have been perusing Instagram and Pinterest and getting lots of vintage inspiration. And so there's these vintage like specimen cards that you can create. It has like a little window, and then they put like a flower or a bug or something behind there, and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to turn this card into a specimen card. So we're actually going to cut a window out and create kind of a layered up. This is going to be a dimensional card, and I'll kind of explain that as we go along. But some of the things that I pulled out to use is this specimen stamp set from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. I've used this one once before on one of these word study cards. I'll try to link that video down below if there's a video for it. But this just has these giant detailed bugs. I know bugs aren't for everybody, but I'm a boy mom and we love nature, and so we do bugs. Anytime that I'm at like a women's retreat or around the women at church, I'm the bug killer. Usually I'm the one that will go and deal with the bugs. Everybody's freaking out. So bugs don't bother me. And so I'm going to be using that stamp set. I pulled out a few different Open Journey stamp sets that I thought would be fun for some embellishments. Just some words, there's some textures. I'm going to use a little bit of the stars. I like these like coffee rings. So we're just going to distress up this card here. So I will link those down below. And then for the base, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can stamp and ink, but that does take time. And so that's where I'm going to pull out these backdrops from Tim Holtz. This is the volume 1 set. These are really cool. They are giant sheets of patterned paper. And what Tim does is he actually sources these. He goes to all these antique shops and kind of sources all of these vintage goodness and then scans them in and turns them into these ephemeras and papers and things like that. And so I've already gone ahead and chosen a couple, and these are going to be kind of our base for the front and inside of this specimen card. So I just picked some that had some fun textures. A lot of this is going to be covered up or cut away, but it's just going to give me some instant color and texture, and then we'll go ahead and embellish a little bit extra on there. We're going to do some embossing. I'm going to have a fun technique to color in this bug using some iridescent gelatos and just some ephemera pieces and things like that. So it's going to be a fun one and a little bit different. And so let me go ahead and put you guys on fast forward, and I'll show you how we put together this card for Word Study Wednesday. All right, buckle up. We have a lot of steps here. So I'm starting with this paper. This paper is actually going to be the front frame for our specimen card. So I've already gone ahead and penciled in a square area in the center of this paper. I used a see-through Tim Holtz ruler to do that. I will link the ruler down below. It made it a little bit easier. So I'm attaching this to the Forgive card. I'll go ahead and round corners, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut out the center part of this card. I figured it was easier to do this in one step rather than cutting out a square from the paper and then cutting out a square from the card. This kind of saved a little bit of time. And so I'm using my paper trimmer, which has a wired guide. I can also kind of see where I'm cutting at, so I'm able to just perfectly cut out the center square portion of this card. And there you go. We have a frame. We can save that center portion for a different project, but I'm going to go ahead and add some acetate to this window. You could use plastic packaging. You could use vellum if you wanted a softer look, but plastic packaging is a perfect way to use your trash if you don't have any acetate. And I just use some liquid adhesive to adhere that. And then this paper is going to be our background. Now, I typically cut my papers to about 4 inches by 4 inches is about the area that you have to work on above the word on these focus cards. But you just gotta guesstimate. So before I adhere everything together, we're gonna do a little bit of embellishment on this background piece. So I've pulled out this scripty stamp. This actually came from the Christmas devotional kit from last year from Open Journey, but you can buy this stamp individually as well. I'm inking it up in some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is a pigment ink. I typically use a clear ink to emboss with, but one, I wanted you to be able to see what I was doing. I wanted to see what I was doing, and I wanted a little bit of contrast. If there was any area that was kind of spotty, I wanted the dark ink to show through. And then I used some Princess Gold embossing powder over the top of that. The VersaFine ink, because it's pigment, it takes a little bit longer to dry, so you have time to emboss with it. And then I'll just heat set that until it's good and shiny. Again, a lot of this will be covered up, but I'm just adding some additional, shine to the background and some interest. So I'm just holding these two together because I want to make sure that I get the perfect placement for my bug. So this particular stamp tool is no longer available, which is a bummer because you can stamp with clear stamps or rubber stamps. I will link an alternative stamp positioning tool down below. I imagine that you can stamp rubber stamps with it. Let me know if you've tried it. But we're going to emboss this bug on the background. And I'm using a stamp positioning tool because I am stamping over the top of that gold embossing. So I want to make sure that I can double stamp this if needed. I'm also stamping this in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And then we are going to apply some clear embossing powder over this. Beetles are kind of shiny, and so I want to make sure that I reflect that with this. I don't want it too flat. So by using the clear embossing powder, it's going to make this beetle look shiny. We are going to do some more treatment to this bug, but I'm really just concerned about getting the legs and antenna stamped on, and then we're going to layer another piece on top of this. So I've still got that stamp in my stamp positioning tool. Now I'm just going to load up a piece of regular cardstock. Again, I'm going to treat it with my powder tool, stamp with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm using that pressure tool from RV Arts. I'm going to link it down below. It has been a lifesaver for stamping with my stamp positioning tool. It makes it so nice to get good pressure on my stamp. But here I went ahead and added some clear embossing powder to this bug as well. For this one, we're just worried about the body. We're going to cut away the body and layer it on top of the legs that are stamped on the card. But we're going to set that aside for a second and finish up the background around this bug. Here I'm stamping these coffee rings. I'm going to stamp it in some old paper distress ink. I was afraid of there being too much contrast, so I didn't go in with a brown, and I probably should have, because in the end, you can't even see the stamping that I did. It's completely covered up. It's completely blending in. So, sometimes things work out and sometimes they don't, and that's okay. And then I've gone ahead and pulled out a bunch of those star stamps, again, from that Christmas stamp set, and I'm layering them all around the bug. I'm using my stamp positioning tool just so I can stamp everything down all at once. And we are going to emboss these as well. So I'm going to stamp them in the VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Again, using that pressure tool. The pressure tool does come from Canada, I believe. So shipping may be a little more expensive for those of us in the States, but I like that there is an option for those of you guys who are not in the United States. Gives you an option to, have access to something to order. So especially those in Canada, it'll probably be much cheaper shipping for you guys. So I will link that down below for you guys. But I did go ahead and cover those stars in that same Princess Gold embossing powder and then heat set those. And I'm loving how this is coming along. But it needs some more color because everything's pretty monochromatic right now. So I'm using some Tea-Dye Distress Oxide Spray to splatter some splatters on there. And then I'll set that aside and let it dry. And then I'm going to go in with some Tea-Dye Distress ink and ink blend this over the frame. I kind of jump back and forth between the background and the frame. I'm just letting things kind of dry. And at this point, I had a basic idea of what I wanted to do with this project, but I'm kind of working on the fly as well. So I'm just kind of jumping back and forth as ideas come to me. But I'm using some mint tape just to mask off the bottom portion of the card because I only want the top portion colored. I'm trying to leave the bottom of all these cards the same, just plain white with the contrast of the lettering. That way they're easy to read. I don't want to cover it up with any kind of color or anything like that. The ink, Distress inks should wipe off of the acetate, but I wasn't wanting to risk it staining the acetate at all. So now I'm just using that same piece of tape to kind of mask off the inner portion, and I'm inking up that inner edge of this frame. And you can see it just adds a little bit more something to it. And then I'm going to go ahead and add that same Tea-Dye Distress ink blended around the background card. I'm using the Tea-Dye for this back portion because I want to pull in the background. The background is more like creams and greens, and the frame was more of that tea dye color. And so by using this tea dye ink for the background, it's going to help kind of tie the background in with that frame piece. Again, a lot of this is going to be covered up. So set that aside to dry, and then we can work on coloring the body portion of our beetle. So remember, we did heat emboss this with clear embossing powder, so that's going to resist and maintain that deep black stamped area. There isn't a whole lot of area to color on this bug, but there is a little bit. So I've used a few different gelatos. Most of these are from the Galaxy set. They all have some iridescence to them. It wasn't enough iridescence, and I'll kind of dress them up. So really you could use any gelatos or Neocolor 2 crayons or watercolors or markers, anything you want to color these in. But I'm wanting to get that kind of iridescent shine that you get with like a beetle, I guess. So I'm just kind of mixing a variety of different colors. I'm using a water brush. Again, a lot of this sits kind of on the surface, and so I'm continuously kind of wiping it away from the surface to see how intensified the color is in the white areas. There isn't a lot of white areas, but just by building up and layering, I am able to get some color into those itty bitty little areas. You could also use a different color of embossing powder if you wanted to, you know, just or even stamping in a different color if you wanted more color to the bug. So I'm like, it's not quite iridescent enough. So I pulled out some Perfect Pearls, and initially I kind of dusted over the top, and it's going to grab a hold of the areas where the gelato is, but it still just isn't quite cutting it. So I'm going to tap out some of the Perfect Pearls onto my nonstick craft mat, and I'm going to make like a shimmer water. So I'm going to pick that up with my water brush, mix it in with the gelatos, and now you can see I have this super shimmery color. That is what I wanted. I wanted it very, very shimmery. So I'm going to coat this pretty generously. That way the color is really intense in the white areas. I'm going to dry this, and then I will gently wipe off any of the color and Perfect Pearl that's laying on top of the embossed area. You could leave that, but I'm not wanting it to have that fuzzy look. You know what I'm talking about. When the black line gets covered in color, it just kind of looks muted. I didn't want that. So I cut out the body. I'm inking up the edges with just some black soot distress ink, just so there's no white core of the paper exposed. And then we're going to pop this part of the body up in a second here. But first I'm going to add a little bit more color to the background. There isn't a lot of color. Like I said, there's not much color showing on the body of the beetle. So I felt like it needed a little bit more color in the background. So I'm just smushing out some of those gelatos and creating, you know, like a paint out of it, and then splattering that on the background. Makes a big, giant mess, but that's okay. But just adds a little more contrast to the background. So made sure that was dry, and now we can start assembling. So I'm going to add some pop dots to the back of the body of the beetle. And when I flip this over, you can see there definitely is a difference between the body that is stamped and the body that we colored. So it did pick up a little bit of the color. In person, as you tilt it in the light, you can see kind of the iridescence and shine, and you can see the purples and greens and blues in that beetle. But now you can see we've got the stamped and embossed legs kind of poking out. That way we didn't have to worry about fussy cutting those. The body portion is popped up on some adhesive, so it gives it some dimension. And before assembling, we are going to just finish up a few details here. So I'm taking that same tea dye distress ink and inking up all of these little ephemera bits. These are from the Snippets set. I'm not sure if the set is still available from Tim Holtz. Any of his ephemera packages have a ton of these just teeny tiny little random bits and bobs. I tried to pick some that had a little bit of color to them just to kind of dress up the front frame. There was this really fun kind of luggage tag. So I'm using some gold thread, and I'm going to thread that through the tag. And then we're actually going to sandwich that thread in the card when we assemble it. That's how we're going to attach it. And I'll show you how I do that here in a second. But on this little label piece, I'm pulling out the word save. This was from the Seeds of Hope stamp set, I believe. stamped that on the label. And then I pulled out this specimen stamp from the specimen stamp set and wanted to add this to the front. So I'm masking off the bottom of the card, inking this up with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, stamping it on there, and then I will coat that with that same Princess Gold embossing powder. I don't want it to get too busy, and since there was already some writing on the paper, I decided to go for the gold. That way it's just a subtle shine happening on the front of the card. Heat set that, and then before we assemble, we want to make sure all of our stamping is done because it's going to be hard to stamp. So I'm stamping the Strong's Concordance number on the back using some more of that tea-dye distress ink. And now we can start assembly. So I'm going to put the bug card on the back of the definition portion of the card. And then we are going to use some foam adhesive to pop up the frame portion. Now, because there is foam adhesive on the bug, we need to double up the foam adhesive that we're putting on the frame. If I only put one layer of foam adhesive, the body of the bug would be right up against the acetate, and I don't want that. I want it kind of layered and stacked. So I folded my foam adhesive tape in half, stickiness to stickiness side, and that just makes it easier to cut down. I cut it into thirds, so it's a little bit thinner. And we're going to go ahead and add that all to the back. So all around the edges of the acetate and then filling in that thicker bottom portion. And then you can see I'm attaching the thread from the tag onto that adhesive and sandwiching it between the two cards. At first I was just going to leave that tag kind of flopping around. In the end, I end up adding a little bit of adhesive. But if you wanted it to have some movement, this is a great way to just have it attached without having to use any glue or anything like that. So now we can stick everything together, and at this point you can be done, but I didn't like that there was you could see the foam adhesive. It just seemed a little bit unfinished to me. So I'm using an embossing pen. This is just a pen that has clear embossing ink in it. I'm running that along the inside edge of the card where the foam adhesive is and along the foam adhesive, and then I am adding some more of that Princess Gold embossing powder, and then I'll heat set that. You could also use paint, you could use a marker, you could try to use washi tape. There's a variety of different things that probably would have been easier than embossing, but I wanted it to be gold, and I figured the embossing powder would kind of fill in any gaps and things like that, and just kind of, I figured the metallic would distract from the texture that's happening. It's kind of messy where I had assembled it. So there's where I added just a little dot of glue. That way the tag would stay in place, and then we can add our little ephemera bits. Just kind of here and there, just trying to add a little color to the front, trying not to cover up too much of that front window. These cards are only 4 inches by 5 inches, so they're pretty small. You don't have a whole lot of space to work with, so it doesn't really take too much embellishment to dress these up. This card definitely was more labor intensive than some of my other cards, but I think it would be really fun if you wanted to do an entire series of specimen cards, specimen frames with these cards. I think that would be really fun. So here is a look at the finished card. I love it. You could put little shaker bits in there if you wanted. You could make shaker cards. So many ideas with this kind of layered up frame idea. And then here's a look at the finished 6 cards that we've done so far. Again, that playlist will be linked down below for you guys. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below for me. Check out the description box for links to everything that I used in the video today. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. Be sure to click on that bell notification button so you don't miss any future videos from me. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.